Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS issues. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, and since 2016, Monica Shimonik has been coaching moms and dads as they navigate through the treacherous waters of the family law racket. Aside from workshops which help with specific problems, her 12-week signature course, The Best Interest of the Parent, uses a four-quadrant model to create a robust healing and empowerment system so that you control the narrative in your life, not the state. Use coupon code Slam the Gavel to get 10% off her course. And those notes will be in the podcast notes. And I've got a really excellent guest. His name is Attorney Kevin Patrick Seaver. He is an experienced, trusted lawyer since 1991, recognized expert successfully specializing in fighting DCF, and which is also called CPS for those people don't know what DCF is. He's owner and operator at Law Office of Kevin Seaver, studied law at New England School of Law, studied maritime at Massachusetts Maritime Academy, studied at Tulane University Law School, and he lives in Boston, Massachusetts. So I totally welcome you, Attorney Kevin Seaver. How are you doing?
I'm doing terrific, Mary. Thank you for the kindness, the privilege, and the honor to appear tonight.
Oh, I'm glad to have you on because we need to learn a lot from what you know.
Oh, aren't you kind? We'll try to do our very, very best to try and help everybody.
Well, I'm glad. How did you get involved in this?
That's a great question. When I was a newly minted attorney and I didn't know any better, I had a case that no one wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole, and they gave it to the new guy on the block. And it involved a woman who had multiple daughters, and her husband took a short course in intercourse with his secretary and impregnated her and married her. So she got divorced, and they had a baby, the father. And the father wanted his oldest daughter to be kind of like a pseudo sleep-in babysitter. And so at every opportunity, he was trying to wrestle custody from the mother. So the mother one weekend, when she happened to be Halloween, went out and bought not one, but two different Halloween outfits for her older daughter. And she brought them home, and the daughter tried on one, then she tried on the second one, and she says, "Mom, I don't like either one." And she called her mother a bitch for getting her lousy Halloween outfits.
Oh
So the
my.
mother instantaneously slapped her across the face and says, "Don't you ever call me that again. I'm doing the best I can under the circumstances." Well, needless to say, that evening, the mother went and chaperoned a high school dance. The daughter had a wonderful time, wore one of the costumes, and had just simply a blast with all her friends. The
Mm-hmm.
next day was Saturday, and the mother took her daughter out with all her friends trick-or-treating. Then Sunday came, and the child went to her father's and told her father how the mother had slapped her on the face Friday night. And the father was an auxiliary police officer in this Tony town north of Boston.
Oh
And
no.
he was involved with law enforcement and knew what buttons to push, and went and got a restraining order against the mother, went and filed in probate and family court for custody, and filed also with Child Protective Services, which is what CPS is.
Mm-hmm.
So me not being very smart, walked into a hornet's nest, and one hell of a hornet's nest. So the first thing I did was I sat down with my client who had very little money, and I had very little brains back then. And I basically was making pennies on the dollar, but I was thrilled. I was excited. I had cases, not one, but three of them rolled into one. So the first case headed to district court in Salem, Massachusetts, the Witch City. And I appeared in front of an old crusty judge who was a really nice person by the name of Judge Doyle, who has since retired. Now his son fills his spot on the district court last time I checked in Salem. And I prepared my client, and I was up against the biggest and the largest and the most expensive law firm on the North Shore. Again, I was too dumb and stupid to realize that I really had my hands full. And I went into court, and I told the judge the story, exactly what I just told you. And the judge looked down at me and looked down at the mother and looked down at the father and looked down at the other attorney and said, if my daughter had said that to me, I would have done the exact same thing. Case dismissed. And I said to my client, don't turn around, don't look, don't laugh, don't smile, let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah, right.
So I was leaving the court, and I was halfway up the aisle. I could hear the other judge from this big, powerful, rich law firm yelling at the judge, but Your Honor. And I heard the judge, the last thing I heard as I went out the doors was, if you say another word, I am going to hold you in contempt of court. And out the doors we went. So that was number one. Then I had to go to the custody court where they were seeking custody. And I presented to the judge the restraining order, which was dismissed in district court because the judge realized, as did the judge in the probate court, that the father was forum shopping. He certainly could have brought the custody and the probate matter together instead of going to district court, but he was forum shopping for a favorable judge regarding the restraining order. So in other words, he could have combined the restraining order with the custody order. He didn't do either. When we went into the probate court, the judge, I got the transcript of the hearing, what the judge had said in the previous court. I saw the judge look down at the transcript and read it, and then he looked up, and the judge looked down, looked up, and smiled and said, case dismissed. No custody. Now, the final piece of the puzzle, 2 down, 1 to go, was Child Protective Services. And they were a tough bunch and have been and always will be a tough bunch. And so I went to, have the hearing, and I explained to the hearing officer that it's kind of like in basketball, no harm, no foul. The child was slapped, absolutely, we don't deny it. She did it, but the mother didn't do it in an angry or harsh way. She did it to focus the child and to tell the child your conduct, behavior, and attitude is unacceptable. This is a 16-year-old child. There was no marks, no bruises. And guess what? We went at the fair hearing too, and I thought to myself afterwards as I sat eating a large roast beef sandwich with my client and a frap, which was basically about all we could afford after the big victory, 3 out of 3. And I said to myself, there may be a place in life for me to do this. And so that's how I got the start, was I realized there was a niche, there was a need, there was a necessity, because nobody wanted to touch the Child Protective Services case, nobody. So I took it on. Again, I was too dumb, too young, too stupid, too whatever. And it was a happy ending. And everybody went home happy. So that was a good, except for the father, by the way.
Right. Well, who guided you through this? Did you have any mentors?
At that time, I went to the library and I read and I read. And when I thought I had read enough, I read some more. And I just kept going on it until I really understood what I was up against, because each court was different. District was different than probate. Probate was different than Child Protective Services, where they had the fair hearing. So it was all different. So each time I had to do a different set of research. And each and every time we would spend, many hours reading about what did we need to do? What was the secret path? What path had been shoveled yet that I could walk down, not have to walk through the snow, the cold winter of Boston.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a lot of, probably a lot of information you had to go through to figure all this out, even though you have a law degree.
Yeah, but it was something that I truly, really enjoyed, because all of a sudden the dots were connecting. Everything was connecting. And I think the district court judge, much to his credit, doing and saying and ruling the way he did, gave me that open door. And that, again, that transcript was transcribed, and we used that. And it was a very valuable lesson that I've used many times in my career, was that when you create a record, get it transcribed. Get it transcribed so you can utilize it if need be, if you're in other courts, to show how another judge has ruled. And it's not controlling law, obviously, but it certainly is powerful enough that if one judge says, hey, wait a minute, this is a big nothing. This is they're making a mountain out of a molehill. And this should not stand. This is unjust. And the mother was a good mom. Mom didn't have a criminal record, no drug or substance abuse, worked hard, raised her daughters, had done all the right things. This was a good girl. And she deserved a better fate than what this, what do I call father? I'll go easy on him. This gentleman had laid before her and her daughter. It was much to do about nothing. And I thought the father should have been ashamed of himself, but he wasn't.
Did he ever keep pursuing custody? Do you know?
The child turned 18, so I lost track.
Okay.
woman, and I haven't seen her in many years. And that's a great question. And perhaps I should follow back up, and I haven't, but that's a great question. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that.
No, that's okay, probably because you have a lot of other cases. You probably have a lot on your plate.
You're kind, but that's one story I should have followed back up on. No question about it.
Well, that's okay. I mean, a lot of people wanna know, how does CPS become involved with a family? People have no clue.
Well, I think it's really important to understand that we have people in Massachusetts called mandated reporters, non-mandated reporters, and you can report anonymously, which means you don't have to give any information. And mandated reporters are people such as police officers, firefighters, teachers, nurses, doctors, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, the clergy now, and others that come within the purview, such as daycare, of children. And it's an attempt to try and protect children. And these individuals, pursuant to the law, have the affirmative duty that if they suspect or have suspicion of child abuse, they must report to who? To Child Protective Services. And they must file what's called the 51A, which is slang for the child abuse report. And DCF then screens the report in, and they have 3 days to decide such. And at the
Mhm,
end of those 3 days, they either screen it in and they assign it to a 51B, which is the investigation and an investigator. And they determine during the screening process whether that's going to be on an emergency basis where a child is at risk of harm, or whether it's going to be done non-emergency where the Child Protective Service 51B investigator has 15 days or more if they need it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, to go and investigate the case in chief.
mhm,
And then once they do the 51B investigation, there's 4 outcomes that can occur. The first is which we all root for, is to have it unsupported. The
mhm,
second type is where they find substantial concern and they open up an assessment. It's kind of real murky. The substantiated concern is kind of like, well, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, you did it, but you didn't. But there's
mhm,
something there. We're not sure what's here. So we're going to do a further assessment of the family, which runs another 60 days. And that's working days, not just Saturdays and Sundays and holidays. So that can go on for quite some time. The
mhm.
third type is when they support the decision and you have an assessment. And then the fourth type is a supported decision where there's no assessment. Very rarely do I ever see a supported decision where there's no assessment.
Hmm. And what do you do? I don't know how many cases. How many cases have you had dealing with this?
Oh my heavens. I lost count a long time ago, Mary,
Oh,
thousands, you know,
hmm,
in and out of court, because you have to understand that there's 2 types of places Child Protective Services gets involved. There's cases that are outside the court, and that is where a family may have abused or neglected a child, or there's an allegation of such. So DCF will do an investigation. That's one part of the case. The second part is when it's supported and they go to what's called an assessment. And once the assessment's open, that can go on for a period of time and can go on for a very long period of time.
hmm,
All right. And there's also a third type of case which goes to court, where the department has substantial risk of harm. They file what's called a care and protection, a petition, and affidavit in the juvenile court or the probate court, and they seek custody of the child, the children. And
hmm,
that's like war. It's big time, big time, big time problems.
hmm. Do you see a lot of that?
I do. Right now in Massachusetts, there's well over 10,000 children in foster care. That's not happenstance. Many people say, well, that'll never happen to me. And I say, how contraire. I've represented the most powerful politicians, lawyers, doctors, investment bankers. I recently had a client that was living in a house worth well over $5 million. And, he was in charge of, investments that were worth just a gazillion dollars. And, I have clients say to me all the time, well, that never happened to me.
Hmm,
And there's a prejudice and a lack of objectivity out there because some people say, well, if you're involved with Child Protective Services, you must have deserved it. And it's just not true. There's many an innocent family. You must remember, Mary, that Child Protective Services and some of the best people I've ever met, and some of the worst, work for CPS. And that's true of any agency, any governmental agency, because what is DCF? What is Child Protective Services? They're the government. And there's some good people, and like everything else in life, there's some bad people. And that's true of lawyers. There's some great lawyers, and there's some not so nice lawyers.
Mhm.
And that's true of every walk of life. Because what is CPS? They're mere mortals, they're individuals, they're human beings. I got news for you. They make mistakes. They,
Mhm.
they may never admit it, but they do. And they do all the time. And so they're human beings. They're individuals. They're people. They're mere mortals.
Mhm.
So when they make a mistake, you've got a right to what's called, if it's a supported decision, to an appeal. And if it's a substantiated concern, you have a right to a grievance, different types of appeals. So you must exercise your rights, know your time standards, know the policy, procedures, and protocols of Child Protective Services, and make sure you execute them. Make sure you're on the cutting edge, you know what you're doing and how you're going to do it. And unfortunately, most people don't.
Mhm. Right, when some people are indicated, they don't know what to do. They don't even know if they can appeal that. They just think if they're indicated with, say, emotional child abuse, they just don't know what to do about it, so they just keep going and not fight it.
That happens, Mary, from time to time. And what happens too is that this not only can affect you as a parent, but it also can impact your job.
Mhm.
For example, if you're a teacher and you have a 51A filed against you for child abuse and it's supported, and you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to become a teacher or a social worker or some type of therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, or even a nurse or a daycare. You might
Mhm.
spend a lot of money for your education. I had a client that spent $250,000 to become what she always wanted to be, a therapist. And in a blink of an eye, she had an allegation supported against her, which was false. So we had to roll up the sleeves and dig deep and go fight for her. But she
Mhm.
was just such a wonderful young person.
Mm.
And when all is said and done, thank heavens, everybody went home happy. But
Mhm.
people don't realize what they don't know. And they need to understand that, I've had people badmouth social workers. Hey, she lied to me. Well, did you ever think that perhaps because she's a social worker, she doesn't know what the law is? I mean, I think it's a bit harsh. It'd be like saying to me, well, you told me about clinical stuff, Kevin. I'm not clinical. I'm not a social worker. I'm a lawyer. So we all have our different roles. And sometimes people rely upon social workers and Child Protective Services workers when they truly shouldn't do such. Because the Child Protective Services social worker, they have a different role. They are not your advocate. And in some cases, they're not your friend, they're not your ally, and not even a good neighbor. They're there for a certain purpose, that is child protection of the children. And parents lose sight of that. So they will take what the social worker has as gospel. And again, the social worker, again, they're mere mortals, they're human beings, they're individuals. They make mistakes. So you
Mhm.
can't rely upon them. That makes sense?
Mhm. Most definitely. Yeah. What changes do you see should be implemented in the courts when it
How,
comes to CPS issues?
how long is this show?
Well, hey, however long it has to be.
Let me begin by saying the following, Mary, that when I first started, um, the judges were able to give custody to DCF or Child Protective Services, as well as take it back the next day if they needed or wanted to, if the case was what they called advanced, and it went back in front of the judge. And I think that is something that is extremely sadly missing from the repertoire. I think the judge should be able to do almost anything. When
Mhm.
you put the robes on, you take the bench, the judges should be supreme. Good, bad, or indifferent, you know?
Mhm.
Um, all the juvenile court judges I've appeared in front of, very few have I walked out and said, why did he do that? Or why did
Mhm.
she do that? And I have great respect for the juvenile court judges and the probate court judges. I think they got tough jobs. Now, again, some people throw rocks at them and say, hey, bad decision. Well, I got news for you. They too are mere mortals. They're human beings. They're individuals. They're going to make mistakes. And they do. But when all is said and done, I think there's some of the most compassionate people and really care and love children. Well, they couldn't do the job they're doing. There's no way. You'd get burnt out way too fast, too quick, too soon.
Do you think there should be video cameras and tamper-proof mics in the courtrooms?
Well, let's back that up a little bit. You asked me for changes in the courts. One of the things I'm dead set against, and it harkens back to, one of my favorite cities in Massachusetts is Salem. I absolutely think it's a fabulous city for many different reasons. And one of them is because it's got such great history. And if you go to like the Salem Witch Museum, which I encourage all your listeners at some point in time, come to Boston. Come to Boston in the springtime, as the song says, but come anytime except for perhaps January, February, or March. But
Right.
it's a great place. There's so much history here. Salem has the Salem Witch Museum, and I don't like the fact that any type of case is behind closed doors, where it's out of the view of the public and also the press. I see no good from it. Now,
Mhm.
others have argued with me. Others will say it needs to be that way, Kevin, to protect children. I don't believe it protects the children. I just don't. And I think that it's a shame that things are behind closed doors. I don't think that serves the public. I don't think it serves anybody. That's just my bias.
Mhm.
Now, as for tamper-proof microphones and this, that, and anything else, I believe in justice. I believe that there should be no injustice. But there will be from time to time because, again, people are people. They will do whatever it takes, some of them, to get to where they need to go. And that's just the sad fact of it. So you can do everything by the book, everything you think you need to do, but in the end, if someone wants to change or manipulate something, they're going to find a way to do it, Mary. That's just my attitude.
Mhm. Have you run across any bias, any collusion going on in some of these cases?
As to who? By who?
Between, well, we'll say maybe between a judge and the opposing attorney, for instance.
I can honestly tell you I never have.
Mhm.
And with that said, um, you've been doing it as long as I have, Mary. You kind of like know the judges. A lot of the
Mhm.
judges today were practicing lawyers that came up, after me.
Mhm.
Um, and again, the litigants, most of the time don't know who they are.
Mhm.
Out of court, after a while, you start to learn who's who and what's what. And in every situation, I try to learn who's my opposition, studying them very closely, and make damn skippy that when I walk into court, I'm absolutely the most prepared lawyer in that courtroom. And know my facts, know my case, and be able to bring it home with a satisfactory outcome. And
Mhm.
you have to understand that um, I don't get close to judges because you can't, you shouldn't. They're supposed
Mhm.
to be unbiased, and how they stay unbiased is by having a distance between them and the litigants. And are they friendly at times? You bet. Can you enjoy their company while you're in the courtroom? I think absolutely, especially if you appear in front of the same judges on a regular, consistent basis. But as for collusion, I've never heard of that.
Mhm.
Does it go on? Really, everything goes on in life.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, and that's part of being human beings. The spirit of a human being. Sometimes things don't go the way they should, for whatever reason.
N When you're in a case, how important is it to keep the power with that judge?
What do you mean by that?
Well, why is it so important to keep the power with the judge? What, you know, improvements, I don't know, with judges?
I think they've weakened some of the judges by and empowered child protective services who, now have to file something at the end of the case to dismiss it. And you can't file a motion for abuse of discretion when you think the department's abuse of discretion regarding the custody. It has to go to trial. There's just all types of nuances that I think a judge should be able to take away the custody from CPCS as he did or she did when they took away custody from the parents. I think if you can take it, you should be able to give it back.
Mhm.
Once they give CPS, Child Protective Services, custody, it's just a complete food fight to try and get the child back to the family.
Mhm.
And I'm just not for that. I think the
Mhm.
judges, I think they should have the power, and I think they would exercise that power as they see fit.
Right. Because I've heard, the judge will listen to the CPS caseworker. They'll just go by what he or she says and just roll that way.
See, I'm gonna, first of all, let's get down to brass tacks here. That child is not the courts. That child's not the judges. That child's not Child Protective Services. That is your child. Your child. So when I get a case, Mary, I sit down with that client. I tell them, you are to at all times be ladylike or gentlemanlike. You are not to fight with anybody. That's my role.
Mhm.
You're not to be disrespectful to anybody. Anybody. You are to get up early, stay late, and work hard. I have my clients put pictures all over their house, on their bedboard, on their mirrors in their bathroom, on their refrigerator. Why? Because when they get up in the morning, I want them to be positively on fire. I want them to be motivated to get the children back. That's the goal. Forget the court, the judge, CPS. It's your child. I don't deal in excuses. I don't want to hear clients that whine or complain. I don't want to hear about being a victim. And what I do, Mary, I have them do more and more and more. And just when I think they've done enough and they've done more, I have them do more. Why is that? I don't even want to leave any doubt in that courtroom that my client has worked their rear end off and deserves their child back. And it's the only way to fly. And I tell my clients, you must be able to communicate with the court, with CPS, with the clerks, the probation office, the court, everybody. You also got to have a great attitude. That's the most important thing in the world. If you don't have a positive attitude, you go nowhere. A bad attitude is like a flat tire in a car. It doesn't work until you change it, that flat tire or your attitude. It is so important. I have clients come into my office bitching, moaning, complaining. They act like seagulls. You know what a seagull does every day, Mary? They eat, sleep, shit, and squawk. That's not going to pass with me. You want your kid back, I'm your man. But you are not going to bitch, moan, and complain. You're going to get up early. You're going to stay late. You're going to work hard. Early's on time. On time is late. Late is unacceptable. You're going to kick some ass. Okay? You do everything you have to do. Now, if you got a problem with a DCF social worker, and I see it all the time, then you must, right from the get-go, you get one first impression, make a good first impression. Why fight with that social worker? That is just stupid. You want your kid back. That's the biggest piece of candy in the world. You have a home, you got insurance, you can replace it. You got a car, you got insurance, you can replace it. You got a boat or a motorcycle, whatever toys else you have, you got insurance, you can replace it. You cannot, Mary. You cannot replace your children with insurance. They're yours. They're God-given to you. And I don't care if you got to go to the moon and back. When you go to the moon, you're going to visit Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter, and every other star and planet up there, if you're my client. You're going to work, and you're going to work. And then when you think you're done working, you're going to work some more. Why is that, Mary? You get one shot at this. You leave no stone unturned. You leave no doubt in anybody's head. And when you get up every morning, you're going to say, I want my child back. And I motivate my clients. Now, CPS, they look for the weaknesses in parents. I look for the strengths. CPS looks to intimidate at times. I look to motivate. CPS looks at the negative. I look at the positive. For example, today in Boston, it's almost 80 degrees. It's beautiful here. Love this place. And let me tell you something. I look outside and it's partly sunny out. The chef looks outside, or CPS, Child Protective Services. They look outside and they say it's partly cloudy out. I get a beautiful, cold, delicious bottle of Poland Springs water I'm enjoying right now. That bottle is half full. Child Protective Services look at that bottle and say it's half empty. Now, Mary, something that's really, really, really important. There's a test for everything, including getting your kid back. Okay? There's tests to get into school, aptitude tests, personality tests, achievement tests, GRE tests, there's SAT tests, there's LSAT tests, there's GMAT, on and on. There's all types of tests. And they're all garbage, Mary. You know why? Because until they come up with a test that measures the heart of a champion, I don't want to hear about tests. There is no litmus test. The only handicap in life is a bad attitude. And my clients, no way, no how. Or I will not be their lawyer. They'll go elsewhere. Okay? You come to me, you better be ready to get up early, stay late, work hard, and fight. And I don't want to hear that you can't do because we can't. I don't want to hear you won't because you will. Here's the deal, Mary. Everybody can, but not everybody will. Why is that? That's the magic formula to everything in life. Everybody can, Mary. We all got 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But not everybody will. Why is that, Mary? Why is that? And that's the secret sauce. So it's the attitude. It's your conduct. It's your behavior. Everybody wants to be a victim. They don't want to take acceptance or responsibility 100%. We all have choices. And the crazy thing is I tell my clients, listen, your ears will never get you in trouble. And I have clients say to me all the time, well, why'd you let Child Protective Services, in your home and talk to them? Well, I had nothing to hide, Kevin. I said, what? Are you crazy? You tell them 20 things, Mary. The 21st thing is something that's negative. You'll never hear about the 20 things you did really well with your kids. You'll hear about the 21st thing that was negative. And that's all you'll see in the reports. Because they're negative Nancy's, they're Debbie Downers, they're Frank Frown Face. You can't have that. So that is for some workers, though, Mary. The good ones believe in family first, not foster care first. The good ones. But the bad ones, those are the ones you really got to watch. Now, how do I know if a work is professional or not? This is what I'm asked all the time. What I do is I look to see, how are they treating me? I'm an officer of the court. So I try to always be an officer and a gentleman. I'm not always married, but I try to be. What Dad said, if they treat me like crap, okay, and I'm an officer of the court, then what runs through my head is, what do they do when I'm not here with my clients? Okay? You with me? Now, as for a social worker going in, they have to write what's called court reports. And I take those court reports, and the most fun you can have with clothes on, Mary, is cross-examination. And I get to put that worker on the witness stand and cross-examine them. And let me tell you something, Mary, I live for that. I absolutely live for that. And every inch of my mind, my body, my bones, my blood, I live for that. Because if they're not telling the truth, the quickest way to the truth is cross-examination. And they're mine, Mary. I own them. I stop the questions and end the questions when I want to end them. And when I get done with them, they're in a world of hurt. They want to disappear on a Southwest Airlines plane. Okay, there's a puddle under their seat. And that's happened more than once, trust me. Now, with that said, going to court and going to trial, Mary, is for fools. Because if you're not smart enough as a lawyer to understand your strengths and weaknesses and prove the strength of your case and get the other side to withdraw or dismiss the case, because you've done everything you can. You've been to Pluto and Jupiter and Mars, and you've been to the moon and the sun. You've done everything you can for your client, and you show and you expose and you give the CPS lawyer everything you got, and they say they've done what they're supposed to do, they deserve the child bond.
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't always work that way, Mary.
When it doesn't work that way, do you just appeal it?
Well, let me give you an example. I was in court recently, and I did everything that was being asked of my client, and then some, on the plan that Child Protective Services had given to my client. And the Child Protective Service lawyer stood up and said, Your Honor, Attorney Seaver's client, it's just checking the boxes. And I turned around and I just shook my head and said to myself, what the hell is she talking about? You know? So the judge looks at me and says, Attorney Seaver, what do you have to say for that? I said, Your Honor, my client's done this, and this they asked her to do. And they've done also on top of that, beyond that, this, and this. My client's crushed it. Now, if my client had come in here and hadn't done this, and this attorney on the side wouldn't be saying we're checking off the boxes. She'd be jumping up and down doing calisthenics saying, Judge, they don't care. They're not doing the services. They're not abiding by what we're asking. They're not checking the boxes. So you can't have it both ways.
Mhm.
They would like to, not happen. Again, if you're my client, I don't give a crap what they tell you to do. You do it 2 and 3 times. Okay? Because to me, the most important thing you can do in life is work hard. And that to me it makes you lucky. Because the harder you work, the luckier you become. And some of my clients have had a hard time with that until they heard the judge say, case dismissed, children returned home. And they walk out of the courthouse with tears in their eyes. And they'll turn to me and say, Kevin, I get it. I get it. And I always say to myself, better late than never. But they take it out on DCF. Some clients make DCF or Child Protective Services the enemy. And that's okay. That's okay. But they take it too far. I'm not going to do those services. F you, Child Protective. I'm going to prove you I didn't do that. Blah, blah, blah. It gets you nowhere. It gets you nowhere. Fighting with Child Protective Services is a loser with the mezuzah type of approach. And I'm not saying roll over, play dead, but there's 2 types of cases. There's cases where there's false allegations, and you appeal those. Then there's cases where the parents have made a mistake. I got my hand raised. I make mistakes every day. We're all mere human beings. The last person that was perfect, they put nails to his hands and feet. Come on, folks. You know, we all have blemishes, flaws, and imperfections. We all wake up. I don't care how beautiful you think you are. We all wake up with bad breath and our hair's a mess. Everybody. There's no excuses there, Mary. So, you know, if you want to be a victim and make excuses and not take full 100% responsibility, not going to be my client. No way, no how.
You know, what if you have a client that's very shell-shocked and they've just been put through the ringer and they're cooperating, but they feel like they're treading water and nothing's happening?
Mary, some of the greatest people that ever lived on this planet, and, you know, one of them was Winston Churchill. And he spoke to the great country of England, with the Luftwaffe is just bombing the crap out of England. He said the following: never give up, never give up, never, ever give up. Don't give up. Failure is an option, Mary. Quitting or giving up is not an option by anyone, unless you want to be a victim, unless you want to feel sorry for yourself. You ever have a pity party? How about your poor damn kids who are in foster care, Mary?
Mhm.
Okay? Being raised by complete strangers. Some of them being fed Brand X cereal when the other kids are eating Wheaties. Or
Mhm.
the kids, there was a story in the Boston Globe a few weeks ago about a foster child who wrote about her experience when she became an adult, how they used to lock the refrigerator, lock the cabinets. And the only time that they were decent to the kids was when Child Protective Services showed up once a month. And the woman was like, nice to everybody. And then once they left, back to jail.
Mhm.
So, and you see these little tinies leave in the middle of the night with two social workers, complete strangers, two police officers, complete strangers with guns and badges, and they've got trash bags. That's their luggage, Mary. And they're
Mhm.
going out the door in the middle of the night to where? To some home they've never been to called what? A foster home, which is the foster care system being raised by a foster parent. And don't get me wrong, Mary, there's some decent foster parents out there too. But to me, foster care should be the last resort. But unfortunately, too many times, CPS shoots first and asks questions later.
Mhm.
There's another thing that should be done about the system. It should be family first, Mary, at every turn of the corner. No one takes better care of your own than your own.
Mhm.
Now, are there some parents that make mistakes or abuse children and neglect children? You betcha. I'm not a fool, Mary. I've
Mhm.
seen it firsthand. What I've also seen firsthand is many, many, many foster homes and foster children and foster parents in the system, up close and in person. And to me, there's different ways to handle it. I think that we should empower a system. If the parents are screwed up, we should make every reasonable effort to place those children with an aunt, with an uncle, with a grandparent, with a cousin, with a sibling, a neighbor, anybody, so that it stays within the family sphere. And it makes it easier for everything, including visitation and reunification. And that's just the bottom line. That's my experience. That's my thoughts. And that's what I believe with every inch of my being, Mary.
Mhm. Now, what should parents look for in an attorney when this is happening and CPS has come through their door and, you know, I don't know, with
That's a
false
great question.
allegations or whatever?
That's a great question, Mary. It's a great question. First of all, Mary, um, parents should take a step back, take a deep breath, and it's hard to do. I mean, I've had parents tell me that as soon as they heard they'd be involved with DCF and should be Child Protective Services, and one parent tell me that she went upstairs, pulled the covers up over her face, and went to sleep. And the next day she was hoping it was just a dream, a bad dream. Didn't happen. I've had other parents tell me that they don't sleep, they don't eat, and therefore they don't think.
Mm.
Parents have told me they feel lost, overwhelmed, and just completely confused. And anxiety like you would not believe. Because when you lose your children, again, you can insure anything you want in this crazy world and life of ours. You cannot insure your children. They are irreplaceable.
Mhm.
So even if there's the smallest you of impropriety, that your children can be taken from you as a parent, if you don't do everything in your powers to keep that from happening, then shame on you. Shame on you. The Constitution says we the people, not we the adults, Mary.
Mhm.
Our children have constitutionally protected rights against child protective services, but only if you execute and implement them.
Mhm.
Many, many, many parents unfortunately shoot themselves and their children in the foot by meeting with DCF without a lawyer. Now it comes down, and I have people tell me all the time, well, I can't afford a lawyer. Let me tell you something, Mary. I had a client that worked at Walmart making minimum wage. He loved his daughter so much that he went and hired me. And he said to me, Kevin, there's nothing more. Without my daughter, I'm nothing. I'm just completely lost. And the allegation against him was by his ex-wife, who said he sexually abused a child. And the story goes like this, Mary, real quick. The child said that he used to sit on the comfy couch. Now, quite frankly, Mary, I had no idea what the hell the comfy couch was. But I brought it to an expert, and the expert told me, Kevin, that's a PBS program on Channel 2 in Boston. I'm like, what? Huh? You know, I was blown away. And what this guy was doing, I said, do you watch TV with your kid? He goes, every time she's over. What show do you watch? He says, The Comfy Couch. I said, what kind of program is it? He says, it's a PBS program. And so I went marching into an appeal and just absolutely just destroyed the social worker because she didn't know what the hell the comfy couch was. And then after the hearing, I told her, don't feel bad. I didn't either. But the case got dismissed. And he was thrilled. Everybody went home happy. But the point I'm making is we all could find a way to come up with money for the most part. Now, there's some people that don't have any. And to them, my hat goes out to them. You know, find legal aid, find a pro bono lawyer, find a low fee lawyer, do something. Now, how do you find the right lawyer? This is simple stuff, Mary. Really simple. When you go on Amazon, you're looking for a product or service, what do? I look at the reviews, and so does everybody else. So the first thing you should do is see if you can speak to the lawyer's previous clients. And I used to allow clients of mine that were prospective to speak to my former clients. I mean, who knows me better than my previous clients that I've worked for? And so to me, you know, the Google and the Gavel and the Better Business Bureau and the lawyers.com and Yelp and, you know, Facebook and all those, you know, there's all types of places to go look about how an attorney has done. And if a lawyer has done well by previous clients, more than likely they have been battle tested and can take on a case that same or similar to yours. Now, with that said now, Mary, many a client will look for a generalist. And that's okay, but they're a jack of all trades and a master of none. When you've got a specific problem, you need to find a specific lawyer for that problem. It's like in medicine. We all know if you've got a problem with your eyes, you go to an optometrist and an ophthalmologist. We all know that if you have a problem with your teeth, you go to a dentist or an orthodontist. We all know you got a problem with your heart, you go to a cardiologist. You have a problem with a broken arm, you go see an orthopedic. You have a problem with your feet, you go see a podiatrist. Well, it's the same thing with the law. Find that lawyer with great ratings that specifically handles your type of case, whether it's a divorce, whether it's parental alienation, whether it happens to be personal injury, or wills, estates, and trusts, or whatever it is, child protective services. Find that specialist, find that expert who's got all types of reviews and is battle tested with great experience, knowledge, skill, and training. That can give you what you need to get you to where you want to go. That makes sense?
Definitely. Definitely. And I think people should be looking at the reviews.
What else can you, I mean, to me, Mary, if someone calls me and says, hey, Kevin, you know, I want to hire you, but I really want to speak to one of your clients, I'll say to them, if you speak to my client, after you're done speaking to the client, there's no more impediments, you're going to hire me. They'll say, yeah, I'll let them speak to, 50 of my clients. I don't care. Because they're all going to say the same thing, that I worked hard for them, that I got them the right result. That I was the same one on Monday as I am on Friday. Kevin never changed, that I could reach him. I mean, Mary, I love most of my clients, like 99% of my clients, I just love. And they become like family to me in many ways. And this is unheard of, I give my personal cell phone to my clients. I give my legal assistant the cell phone. You can say, why is that, Kevin? I have a case today where the cop showed up at my client's door. And my client called me and my assistant on our personal cell phones. Now, if you had to go through the rigmarole of my office, I got great staff, Frankly and Phil and Amarita and Marty are the best. But the thing is that I might have been not available. And when the cops were there, I was afraid they were going to try and take the kids. So I talked to the social worker and I talked to the police and they couldn't have been nicer. And I said, do you have a search warrant? They said, no. I said, why here? We just want to see the children. So I told my client, bring the kids out. They got no marks or bruises because I had just seen the kids on Saturday in my office, and let's put an end to this nonsense. So now we're talking about closing the case 3 hours later because they said, well, we heard the kids didn't go to the doctors. False. Then he was saying, we heard the kids were in an early intervention. False. So we're in the process of getting those letters. And I said to the supervisor, if that's not true, why are you keeping the case open? And she said to me very honestly, and I had a trial with her a couple of years ago, she says, Kevin, we're going to close the case. I said, well, get your papers ready because I'm going to bring it. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get this case closed. Now, everybody goes home happy, Mary. My client's thrilled. He's like, Kevin, I never could have gotten that point with DCF or CPS, Child Protective Services. But that's because he didn't know the policy, procedures, protocols. He didn't know how to handle it. And he was handling it all the wrong way. He was trying to use a sledgehammer instead of using a velvet glove to get along with these people. Say, hey, what do you got? What's the problem here? What are we struggling over? How do we get this case closed?
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Definitely.
Okay.
And then why does DCF get law enforcement involved? Why does that happen? A lot of people want to know why the police get involved.
Mary, I'm about to sneeze on myself. You ready? Bullshit. Oh, I got it all over me. Sneeze again, you keep that up. Why do you think? Just common sense, think about it. They try to intimidate, whereas a great lawyer motivates. CPS tries to intimidate, and a great lawyer will try to motivate. CPS looks at the negative. A great lawyer looks at the positive. I don't know, and to me, that's a bad social worker. But that's okay. I'm going up the food chain. I'm going to a supervisor, area program manager, area clinical manager, area director. I go to the commissioner. I'll go to the governor. Wherever I need to go, I'm going there. You're not gonna hurt my clients because you're hurting the children. And when you hurt the children, our society is built upon our children, and we lose sight of that. So when you hurt the parents, you're hurting the children. And so the police get a call from Child Protective Service because they're trying to intimidate. They come with guns and badges, and I get family members of the police and friends and colleagues and graduates from law school with police officers. I have the utmost respect for police officers, but that's not serving nor protecting. Going to a home to intimidate families. That's just the wrong way to go about things. And the social worker said, oh, we tried to call, we couldn't reach them. My client says, I'll bring my call phone log for the last month, Kevin. They never called me. Why would my client lie to me? There's no reason to. And I had another case where the father was out of the house, Mary. True story. And I had spoken to, and the reason the father was out of the house because he inappropriately touched, allegedly, his granddaughter. All right. I don't know if it happened. I don't know if it did. We're all innocent until proven guilty. DCF didn't want to hear that. Child Protective Services. And I said to them, that's the law in all 50 states. Okay? Okay? Now, he had 2 young children who really wanted to see their father, which really, really affected him. He had been out of the house for a couple of months. So I got the father's sister, who loves the children dearly, to be the conduit, to allow the father to visit with his children. He's not been convicted yet. He hadn't even been arrested at that point in time. And yet he was already judge, jury, and hangman. They already said, he had sexually abused this stepdaughter. And that was just totally unfair. But not only to the father, forget the father, he's an adult. How about the children? What effect does that have on them? Shame on you, CPS. So I said to him Friday night, I'm going to have the aunt do visitation. You got a problem with that because there's no orders from the court criminal saying the father couldn't see the 2 minor children. And they bumbled, mumbled, and stumbled. So Saturday morning, I come out of the shower. It's early Saturday morning. I'm getting ready to clean up and, go hit the gym and do some treadmill and whatever. And all of a sudden, I get a call from my assistant, frankly says, Kevin, there's not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 police cars at our client's home. I'm like, what? I mean, I'm not, I didn't even eat breakfast yet. It's 0:30 in the morning, and DCF's there with multiple social workers too. I'm like, this is crazy. So I call the client immediately on my personal cell, who she called Franklin his personal cell, thank God. Well, I never would have known, because she did call me, I found out later, but I was in the shower. So I say to her, where is the father? Because they think he's at the house. That's why the police are there. And she says, he hadn't been here in months, Kevin. I said, you know that, I know that, but I just wanted to check one last time. I said, where are your children? I'll wake them up. She got all three up. Now I let the social worker in and let the police, and I talked to the police before I did it. I said, police officer, you're there because you think the father's here. Am I correct? They said, absolutely. I said, if he's not there, you're going to leave. That correct? That's correct. And then what are you going to tell my clients? And what are you going to tell their children? And more importantly, with 4 police cars out front, what are you going to tell their neighbors? All of a sudden, silence. You can hear crickets. Now, DCF and the police searched the home, no father. And I said to the police, I said, again, what are you going to tell these children who you've now threatened and scared half to death with your guns and badges? 4 cops. What the hell do you need 4 cops in a home where there's a mother and 3 daughters? Because they thought the father was there. Okay? And where'd they get that from? Child Protective Services thought we were playing games with them. Well, I got news for you, Mary. If I say I'm going to do something, you can take it to the bank. You can draw interest on it. But with that said, I went after the social worker the following week and really gave her one hell of a hard time. Because you tell me you're about child protection, you just scared the crap out of 3 small tinies. That's not right, Mary. That's just so wrong. And it's an abuse of the police. They had no evidence that father was there. They had no proof. And they went, and they're famous for doing what's called child welfare checks. What garbage. It's their way of trying to get into the house and trying to establish things that just aren't there for facts or evidence. And I've seen it over and over again. So now I feel bad for the police because they're a conduit to this nonsense. And I think that when DCF does that, my blood boils, Mary. And that's why I give my clients my personal cell phone for instances like that. And they happen, unfortunately, too often. The other cases that I hate, Mary, is when DCF goes to the schools, and
Right.
I'll just say a few things about schools. Number one, I started a school was taking the name of Abraham Lincoln off one of the schools. Mary, we cannot erase history. Good, bad, or indifferent. We must learn from it. Now, that was an attempt, and freedom of speech is freedom if you agree with the person who you're talking to. But if you don't, no one wants to hear it. But the deal is the following, Mary. Taking the name of Abraham Lincoln off a school only tries to obscure the issue that school is not teaching Johnny or Jillian math, reading, and writing, and that our kids are not being taught well. And our schools in the inner city are just awful. And kids are struggling, and they're being relegated to poverty because they're not being educated. And that's just an excuse to try and eliminate or talk about a different issue. Instead of taking a name off the school, how about improving what's inside the school and educate these kids and make them smart young adults that our society can be proud of? And that's the problem. But Child Protective Services is get kids at school that are sitting ducks. And far too often they go and interview kids by themselves. They take kids out of class, put them in a room, they interview them for half an hour, whatever. Kids go to school to be educated, not to be interrogated. And that's what happens. And the parents have no ability to object or get a lawyer or anything else. Now, bring me back to my other point now. The U.S. Constitution says we the people, not we the adults. Child Protective Services violates these children's rights by taking them out of class and interviewing them. Because they too have the right to counsel. They have the right to an attorney, to a barrister, to an esquire, to a lawyer. But they're not given that opportunity. And I've had Child Protective Services, I had a social worker sit there smugly and smile and tell me, I go to the schools all the time, Kevin, because I know exactly where the kids are. And I said to this smug, arrogant social worker, what effect does this have on the children? No, Johnny or Jillian's got to go back in the classroom and tell all the classmates, well, why'd you leave the classroom for an hour and a half? And what are they going to say? Well, I get interviewed by Child Protective Services. And what effect does that have? Every kid in the school knows before they leave the school that day. And what do they do when they go home? What happened at school today? And every kid's going to tell their parents, well, Johnny and Jillian were interviewed by, Child Protective Services. And then what do the parents say? Ooh, the boogeyman, abracadabra, hocus pocus, smoke and mirrors. I wouldn't hang out with those kids. And what you've done is you've ostracized those kids. And what's it do to their learning? What do they think and do when they go back? Now, I say this respectfully, I had a child that was an honor roll student. She was in the band. She was a cheerleader. She did everything. And she was aces in school. And they took her out and tried to ask her questions about her parents and domestic violence. She was 14 years old, Mary. Mm-hmm. And she came home in tears. The next day, she went back into that school and she gave that principal a freaking licking. She told that principal, I love this school every day of my life until yesterday. I was here to be educated, not to be interrogated. Mm-hmm. I was here to learn, not to face Child Protective Service. And nobody in the school protected me. Nobody. Shame on them. Shame on that principal, that vice principal, that teacher, and Child Protective Services. That is so wrong, Mary. That is beyond wrong. And they could have done it any other time, interviewed this child. And they ruined that poor child. She was so angry and so upset. And then after that, whenever Child Protective Service would come to the home, she basically told them in uncertain terms, F you, you are not talking to me again. You had your shot at me. Because then we got back to reports, they wrote stuff that just wasn't true. Mm-hmm. She said, I didn't say that. I never said that. And it's a huge he said, she said, they said, unfortunate. Now, again, Mary, there's some great social workers, and the great ones don't do that. The great ones believe in family first. They fight for families. And I can tell you stories, don't blow in the face, about some of the great social workers. I know some people say, oh, what's he talking about? Trust me, Mary, there's some great, great, great social workers out there and people that work for, Child Protective Services. And I've got friends and I got enemies in both. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that, there are some decent, honorable people that really love and care about protecting children. And that's a fact. You can take it to the bank.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had called the school and I said, what is your protocol when CPS shows up? And they said, well, we just put them in a room. I said, do you have a witness in there with the child when CPS is in there talking to the child? They said, no, we just put them in a room and they talk and whatever. I mean, they were very nonchalant about it.
Mary, I've been what's called a guardian ad litem, which is the best interest of the child. And I got to tell you, I've interviewed, countless children. And, I had a case one time where the principal was deposed. The child was in a room for an hour and a half. Hour and a half, Mary. My God. After 10, 15 minutes, every kid starts to lose it. I don't care who they are. But an hour and a half, Mary, what in God's tarnation could you ask a child? And I just looked at that principal and I thought to myself, damn you, damn you, damn you. You're supposed to protect these kids. And you just led that kid down the golden path. And that social worker just drilled that kid, and drilled that kid. Awful. And there's no excuse for it. I'm sorry. I have absolutely no shame in telling that principal and a social worker, you be damned. You're supposed to protect kids and you did the complete opposite.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
Mary, there are some things you can do, though. There's what's called a hatch letter. And let me tell you, and let me give you some tips for some of your people to help them with DCF. And I'll tell you some stories. When you have a child in school and you're afraid DCF's going to go there, write to the principal and tell them that your child's not to be removed except under two circumstances only. One, for educational purposes only, and number two, for emergency medical treatment. Otherwise, your child is not to be removed under any other circumstances. And they are the local parents. They're in charge of your kid. So, I've written these letters and it doesn't go over big with the principal. That's too bad. You're not my friend. And I don't trust you to protect my children. And if you feel that way, you feel as though the school is not on your side, that's what you do. Let me give you another example. I've had DCF go to families, especially women. And, as MC Hammer says, it's hammer time. Well, I got news for you, Mary. It's ladies' time.
Hmm.
And I believe in the next 30 years that women have now going to take the world by storm. And why do I say that? Because there's so many women now going to college and graduate school and filling all types of positions. And sooner than later, women will be in control. And when they do, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot better system when it comes to child protective service because they get it. So now, when a woman has a domestic violence perceived incident, the father, when the police come, if there's two people, the police always arrest one person. That's just a given. It's just the way it is. It's protocol. Because if there's only one person left behind, one person can't get into an argument or, there's very rarely any problems. But if you leave the spouse in the house, whoever is the aggressor, then you're going to have more trouble. So the police they arrest somebody. Let's just accept that as fact.
Hmm.
So then they call, if there's kids there, they call Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services, many times I've seen them come in and tell a mom, if you don't go take a restraining order out against your partner, then we're going to take your children. Now, I can't begin to tell you, Mary, how many mothers have come to me with tears in their eyes, just, Kevin, I wasn't afraid of my husband or my boyfriend or whatever. And they say, so I'll talk to him. And, I recently had a case with him, the mom came to me. She says, Kevin, DCS threatened to take my children if I'm going to take a restraining order. I said, you're not get a restraining order then. She said, but Kevin, I'm not in fear or imminent fear of harm, which is the legal standard, with my boyfriend or my husband. I said, well, when you're under oath, you make sure you're under oath. You tell the judge exactly that. When the judge asks you, are you in fear, imminent fear? You say, no, Your Honor. And the judge is going to look at you like you got four heads, say, well, why are you here then, ma'am? Because, Your Honor, I was threatened by DCF that I didn't come down and try to get a restraining order, that they would take my children. Well, let me tell you something, Mary. There's been more than one judge that's called Child Protective Services into the court and reprimanded them big time. Because what they're doing, they're telling mothers and fathers and people to lie under oath that you're in fear and in fear of harm, which you're not. Now, let's be clear with this, Mary. If you are in fear and if you need a restraining order, by all means, go get it. But don't use it as a sword, use it as a shield. Does that make sense, Mary?
Most definitely.
Okay. And that's the way around that. Now, I had another woman that, was threatened that if she went and got a lawyer, which DCF gives parents what's called a parent pamphlet, which says you're entitled to a lawyer, said, if you go get a lawyer, we're going to take your kids. Okay. What choice did she have? Zero. Now, obviously, we reversed that. But, this woman had no reason to lie to me. You follow what I'm saying? Absolutely no reason to lie to me. Now, there are cases, Mary, where, I've had parents come to me and I turn away more cases than I take in, where the parents have made mistakes and they're unable or unwilling to accept responsibility for what they've done wrong. I had a client that was up on the third floor and he went out on a Sunday night and he had a little bit too much to drink, watching the football game, Sunday night football, came home and got into a disagreement with his wife. And he tried to take her phone and the phone busted and they got into a scuffle. And, the son was on the basement. So that's 3 floors below. He could hear them yelling and screaming. And he told Child Protective Services that. He told the truth. And I said to the client, I said, I can't unsupport this. I mean, I'd love to appeal it and I'd love to take your money. I can't do that. And he got really mad at me. He says, I've got a wheelbarrow full of cash. I want to hire you. If I want to hire you, that's my option to hire you. I said, no, it's not. No, it's not. Now, there's different things. And I know you had, different guests on. I've listened to quite a few of your Slam the Gavel podcasts, which I've really enjoyed. But, there's objectivity goes out the window. For example, when there's sexual abuse, it's like the nuclear bomb. Everything comes to a stop. And until we figure out what is or is not going on. And it's really, really tough. Those are really difficult, tough cases. And ironically, when somebody is innocent, the onion starts to unravel and the truth does come out. But you've gotta be patient. You've gotta be willing to fight. And you gotta be willing to stand up and say, I didn't do this, and prove that you didn't do this with evidence and documents and experts like we've had Ding Tong on the show, those type of people
Mhm.
that can testify, that can tell right from wrong and who's what and what's who. And again, sometimes it can get expensive. And some people don't have the financial wherewithal, Mary. That's why some
Mhm.
people don't succeed. Not because they're guilty, but because they don't have the money. Now, one of the biggest things I run into, Mary, all the time is, um, people tell, well, I got nothing to hide, so I let child protective services into my home. Well, what they don't understand is that the first time, Mary, you ride a bike or you are on a skateboard or you do an activity, you're not very good at it.
Mhm.
And that's the same thing being interrogated by a DCF or Child Protective Services investigator. You're not going to do well. But more importantly, your children are not going to do very well.
Mhm.
So it all comes down to, if you want to be successful, you got to have a plan. You got to have a step-by-step, easy, easy, easy guided plan so that you're prepared, your children are prepared, and your home prepared to assure that the allegation is false and stays false. Many times people just don't have clarity, don't have clearness, don't think. And when DCF starts asking them questions, they just do awful at it. And they don't give them the right documentation that DCF's looking for. And then they let their children be interviewed alone. And
Mhm.
DCF, you know, Child Protective Services will ask your children all types of questions. I wouldn't allow my son to be interviewed by Child Protective Services under any circumstances ever. Because even
Mhm.
if he's telling the truth, there was a recent case where it's been stated that 31% of the children were innocent, yet they were convicted by their own statements in criminal court. Now, that's a higher standard than Child Protective Services, but the point being is that you also look at the Innocent Project, where many people have been convicted and then found to be innocent because of DNA, which
Mhm.
leads us to believe that eyewitness testimony and eyewitness identification is very faulty. And so is the child's memory, their ability to tell the truth and understand the truth from a falsehood, their ability to relay a story, their ability to remember what happened a week or 2 weeks or a month ago. And so there's all types of factors that play into why you don't want to meet with Child Protective Services unless you have an advocate, a lawyer for yourself. Does that make sense, Mary?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Now, have you ever run across a parent telling you, this is all one-sided? They didn't interview, you know, our side of the family? Have you ever run across that?
Many times, Mary.
Mhm.
When you hire a lawyer, these, Child Protective Services is going to have to do the right thing because that lawyer is going to walk it through and make sure that everything you dot the I's, you cross the T's. I just recently had a case where two young children, they were, very young, alleged that the father had, abused them. And it was just, it was crazy because this happened during vacation. His family went out of state because the father's family lived out of state. And when they were out of state, they were with his side of the family, which is parents. He had four other siblings with their significant others. So there's 8, 10 people. You had aunts and uncles and grandparents. You had 30 people around these kids at all times.
Mhm.
Now, when in God's name could they have found time to abuse these kids? It was a super vacation for the parents because they didn't have to be parents.
Mhm.
Everybody else was just ooh, ooh, ah, ah, gaga, goo, goo over these kids. So the parents actually got to go out on a date, which is unheard of. They got to go
Yep.
and leave the kids with family.
Mhm.
They were never with the kids. And yet Child Protective Services, much to their credit, you know, did speak to the family. Now, there are other cases where that didn't happen. So what you do is you appeal that, and you bring in the family members, and you get the social worker under oath, and you say, you know, you had mom and dad, correct? And you say, yeah. Mom and dad had families, is that correct? Yeah. But you didn't speak to any of them, did you? No, I did not. And they gave you the phone numbers, is that correct? That's correct. And you put the family members on the stand. You have them testify as to what did or did not happen on appeal. And it's you know, it sounds simple. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But what you want to do, Mary, is go back down the road and find out there's certain things that these, you know, Child Protective Services has to do during the investigation. Make sure they dot the i's, cross the t's. And to me, Mary, I like helping Child Protective Services. You know, you get the case closed and unsupported by giving them the information and making their job easy. I mean, you know, Mary, don't we like people to make our job easy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I do it all the time. I get them the records, I get them the documents, and I ask them, what are you struggling over? What is it you wish you had, you don't have? You know, I'll go get it. And so, you know, when all is said and done, if you give them what they want, then they're going to rule in your favor because it's the right thing. Not because, you know, you're pulling a fast one, you're being dishonest, but it's because you prove your case. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, on the case, they said recently my client, you know, was physically abusing the children. Okay? I got the medical records. Sent the kids to the doctor. The medical records said there was no marks or bruises and the kids were fine. Doctor said the kids were fine. No protective concerns. So now they throw that out. Then they try to rely on, you know, well, they neglected the kids. Well, how'd they neglect them? They bumble, stumble with that allegation. But in the final analysis, they unsupported it. And that's all that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to be vigilant. Just understand what you're up against and how to get to where you need to go.
This was excellent. Is there any last words you can offer to a parent that might be questioning if they have been lied on?
Well, let's be clear about lying, real quick on lying. You know, we've lied to kids our whole life, and our kids will lie to their kids. You know, let's start with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yeah.
And you got Blitzen, and you got Comet, you got Cupid. You know, you got Dancer, Dasher, Donna, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got Blitzen, you know, and you got all these different reindeer. And we lie. We tell them about Santa Claus and how he comes down the chimney and Mrs. Claus and make gifts with the elves all year round. We lie to our kids. Peter Cottontail. How about the Tooth Fairy?
Mm-hmm.
And we show them superheroes. Then we wonder why kids lie.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the information I want to tell the parents is that never, ever, ever, ever give up. Just like Winston Churchill said. And do your very best to be courteous and kind to all. And the truth will show its ugly head. But the last comment I think is most important is that when you're dealing with Child Protective Services, you must muster the evidence. You must muster what is the evidence. For example, when you call the social worker or whoever you call on the Child Protective Services, you want to follow it up immediately with an email that you called. Today's Monday, August 16, 2021. Then you want to follow it up and take that email and mail it to everybody at Child Protective Service so they can't say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't get your email. You know, I didn't get your, no. What you want to do is you want to communicate with clarity and clearness. You want to make sure that everybody understands what they're supposed to do and then go do it. Do not fight with Child Protective Services. I'm not saying roll over and play dead for them. That is not the court's child, the judge's child, CPS's child. That's your child. Go fight with everything that's in your human body. Get your child, your most precious, precious, precious asset home. Leave no stone unturned.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take any prisoners.
Excellent advice. This was a great, great discussion we had. How can people find you?
Well, I want to give I want to give people a website that they can join. It's free. And it's got people from all over the country and also the world. And it's called Successfully Fight Child Protective Services. I'm the moderator of the group. And, there's people in there that are just 10 times as smart as I am, that have been where a lot of these parents are going or will go. And they'll offer free advice and support and a pat on the shoulder and sometimes a kick in the ass. But it's all good. It's called Successfully Fight Child Protective Services. Mary, I'm in Boston. I practice only in Boston, in Massachusetts. I'm licensed only in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I do advise clients from time to time outside the state, but I don't appear in court outside of Massachusetts. And, I'm in Boston. I'm easy to find. My last name, you take the word Beaver, take away the B in Beaver, put an S in it, and you got my last name, Kevin Patrick Seaver, Seaver. You just ring me up on the internet, whether it's on Google or, on my website, which is SeaverDCFlawyer.com. That's Seaver, Seaver, DCFlawyer.com. All one word. So I'm easy to find, Mary. And I try to help people on Successfully Fight Child Protective Services. Every day I try to do one good deed, one good karma to help somebody somewhere, somehow get to where they need to go. And to me, there's so many people out there that need help. I'm going to leave you one last statistic before we go. 1/3 of every child in America, 1/3, Mary, will be involved with Child Protective Services at some point in their life. And the reason that no one talks about it is because everybody's ashamed and appalled and embarrassed to admit they're involved with Child Protective Services. And, no one wants to talk about it, okay? And no one wants to accept it. And those that are involved with Child Protective Services, those on the other side of the fence say, well, they must have deserved that. And then they'll say, well, I'm not some crack-addicted whore down on LaGrange Street in Boston. That's not me. I don't have a substance abuse problem. I don't have alcohol or drugs. I don't have mental health problems. But you know something? Your neighbor might, or your brother might, or your cousin might, or your colleague might. There's so many people out there that people don't understand and realize are involved with Child Protective Services and need a helping hand, and they may have an issue. But, I think that, we can overcome all of this. And I think we need to keep family with family. Family first, Mary. Most important thing in our lives is our family. Everybody says it, but why don't we practice it, Mary? I don't get it.
I'm with you. Well, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Mary. It was a privilege, a pleasure, and an honor. And I thank you for having me. And I wish you good day and I wish you goodbye.
Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again in the future with other exciting episodes. Thank you.